The European Union's lead trade negotiator stated that good calls were held with Trump administration officials on Monday after the close trading partners moved forward with negotiations amid President Trump's tariff-fueled push to rework global trade relationships. The EU remains fully committed to constructive and focused efforts at pace towards a trade deal. Mauro Afovi, the bloc's Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, added in a post on X, "We continue to stay in constant contact. At the same time, sticking points remain." Earlier on Monday, the EU stated that the result of the weekend phone call between Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen provided new impetus for the negotiations. On Sunday evening, 2 days after asserting that the bloc has been very difficult to deal with and declaring that discussions were going nowhere, Trump pushed back a June 1st deadline for a straight 50% tariff on the European Union to July 9th. Talking to reporters in Morristown, New Jersey, Trump confirmed that July 9th would be the day, before adding that we will rapidly get together to see if we could work something out. The EU, which has 27 member states, comprises the largest US trade partner. The US has reportedly been pressuring the EU to cut tariffs on American goods. The EU is reportedly readying some $108 billion in retaliatory tariffs if talks fail. Where do US and EU trade talks go from here? On Friday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent sought to soothe market worries by pledging that the US would announce several large trade deals in the coming weeks. Here are the latest. Frankfurt, Germany. AP. The European Union's chief trade negotiator said Monday he had good calls with Trump administration officials, and the EU was fully committed to reaching a trade deal by a July 9th deadline, after Trump agreed to delay his threatened 50% tariff or import tax on European goods. Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic said on X that the EU's Executive Commission was pushing at pace towards an EU-US deal and the two sides were in constant contact. Sefcovic's calls with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Representative Jameson Greer came a day after Trump said he would delay implementation of the 50% tariff from June 1st until July 9th to buy time for negotiations with the 27-country EU. That announcement came after Trump's call with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who told Trump that she wants to get down to serious negotiations. According to the US President on Sunday, in a social media post Friday, Trump had threatened to impose the 50% tariff on EU goods, asserting that the bloc had been very difficult to deal with on trade and that negotiations were going nowhere.
Deadline for talks between Washington and the EU following a phone call with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Sunday. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Rebecca Christie.
The stakes are high given the size of the US-EU trading relationship. Although the trade partners don't have a free trade agreement like the one the US has with Mexico and Canada, some $1.8 trillion in goods and services cross the Atlantic in both directions each year. EU Commission spokeswoman Paula Pinho told a news conference that von der Leyen and Trump agreed to fast-track the negotiations. The result of the call means that there is a new impetus for these negotiations, and we will take it from there. From our side, we always said we were ready to make a deal. The EU has offered Trump a 0-for-0 deal in which tariffs would be removed on industrial goods including automobiles. But the US administration has said it will not lower tariffs below a 10% baseline imposed on almost all its trading partners. Trump has also announced tariffs of 25% on steel and automobiles, two key trade negotiation differences between the US and the EU. Andy Bounds at Foot makes a couple of simple but notable points as the US and EU navigate President Trump's erratic trade policy. There are two big differences in approach. First, Trump can decide and act alone. He has an idea, And within hours an executive order is prepared and tariffs can be in place. He can reverse course as quickly as he did on April 9 when he slashed the reciprocal tariffs imposed a week before to allow 90 days for talks. The European Commission has power over trade, but it still has to convince a majority of the 27 member states to approve its decisions. So consultations with representatives in Brussels and national capitals are constant and time-consuming. Second, the US cares little about the legality of its measures. Is there such a deep crisis in a country with a healthy growth rate that it can justify use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA? Can you justify tariffs on cars by using Section 232? That says national security is at stake. The courts will eventually decide, but by then Trump might have struck his deals or found another law to try. The EU is bound together by legal red tape. How else could you compel sovereign countries to allow routine cross-border movement of goods, services and people and avoid subsidy races? As a soft rather than hard power, it relies on the international system, the World Trade Organization, UN and so on, to maintain a begin.
Went to the unions, to all of the local unions, they all wanted it, and I'm doing it because all of the congressmen came in, about 5 of them, and the others I understand are in concurrence, and they asked that I do it. But it's an investment and it's a partial ownership, but it'll be controlled by the USA.
That deadline has now been pushed back to July 9th after a phone call with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. In early April, Trump unveiled 20% reciprocal tariffs, he called them, on Europe, aimed ostensibly at eliminating America's trade deficit with the bloc. Last year, the EU sent some $600 billion worth of U.S. goods to the U.S., while importing just $370 billion in American goods. Bond market turmoil forced Trump to quickly pause those 20% tariffs, but his 10% global tariffs remain in place, as do 25% tariffs on EU steel and aluminum. Brussels had been preparing to retaliate with tariffs on some $100 billion in U.S. goods, including aircraft, cars, medical devices, and computers. European officials have pointed out that the bloc's trade imbalance with the U.S. is essentially evened out when services, not just goods, are accounted for. That fact has made Europe reluctant to make big concessions, much to Washington's frustration. Here's U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent speaking to Fox News on Sunday.
The president believes that the EU proposals have not been of the same quality that we've seen from our other important trading partners. EU has a collective action problem here. It's 27 countries, but they're being represented by the one group in Brussels. So some of the feedback that I've been getting is that the underlying countries don't even know what the EU is negotiating on their behalf.
Now, next, it looks like Donald Trump has approved a long-sought takeover of an American industrial icon.
Well, Friday saw the president posting on his Truth social network about a planned partnership between U.S. Steel and its Japanese rival Nippon Steel. Trump said the deal will create 70,000 jobs and add $14 billion to the U.S. economy. Nippon Steel agreed to buy U.S. Steel for $14.9 billion in January 2023. That deal, though, was blocked by the Biden administration on national security grounds. Details of the new plan remain unclear, with Trump describing it as an investment to take place over the next 14 months. A true merger would create the world's third largest steelmaker by volume. Both companies have issued statements cheering Trump's comments. U.S. Steel shares jumped by some 20% on Friday, but they remain several dollars below the $55 price offered by Nippon in its takeover bid. Investors evidently trying to parse what exactly this deal is going to entail. Trump says U.S. Steel will remain under American control. Here he is speaking to reporters on Sunday.
What about the markets then, Brian? How are they shaping up?
Well, Nippon Steel shares jumped more than 7% in early trading in Tokyo on Monday. They've since given up a lot of those gains. Still up more than 2%, though, with the Nikkei overall up 1%. Chinese index is losing ground, though. The Hong Kong off by 1.2%. The Kospian Seoul, though, up 2% as a number of Asian currencies gain against the U.S. dollar, which has been weakening due to concerns about America's growing debt. European indexes, meanwhile, jumping at the open on news of that tariff deadline extension, with automakers and luxury groups leading the gains. London is closed for the spring bank holiday on Monday, but the CAC 40 here in Paris up 1.3%, the DAX in Frankfurt up 1.6% at the open.
Finally, for business, the French President Emmanuel Macron is in Vietnam. He's looking to reinforce Europe's commercial links amid the increasingly uncertain global trade context.
On Monday saw France and Vietnam sign a deal for the purchase of 20 Airbus jets worth around 7 billion euros, along with other deals on nuclear energy cooperation, Earth observation satellites, and vaccines made by French pharma giant Sanofi. Macron's visit to Vietnam is the first by a French president in nearly a decade, comes as Trump's America is upending decades of consensus on global trade. France seeking to portray itself as a beacon of stability in a newly unstable world, a message that's likely finding a receptive audience in the export-dependent Vietnam. Luke Schrago takes a closer look.